The powerful private Russian military company Wagner is expected to fail in Ukraine. This organization has suffered huge losses in the past 5 months. The group's leader, Yevgeny Prigozhin, regularly appears in the media criticizing top Russian military officials. This is causing serious rifts in the armed forces fighting in Ukraine. Last weekend, Mr. Prigozhin threatened to withdraw his troops from Bakhmut if they would not be supplied with ammunition. The situation changed as the Russian generals pledged to increase supply. Wagner also withdrew his statement about leaving Bakhmut. However, in the worst-case scenario, having to leave Bakhmut in particular and Ukraine in general, Wagner's footprint is expected to continue to be present in many places in the world. Wagner has long been present in Africa, helping many governments fighting Islamic and jihadist groups. Recently, there were reports that Wagner shows great ambition, even wanting to appear near the U.S. territory. For example, they went to Haiti to review the situation to outline a plan to have the government crack down on extremist criminal organizations. They also want to buy weapons from Turkey. However, in the case of having to withdraw from Ukraine, Wagner's promised land supposedly still Africa. Wagner has a good relationship with the political leaders in Sudan. The country is in crisis because of the fighting between two factions. Wagner has relations and business with the Rapid Response Group, RSF, led by General Dagalo. Wagner has also appeared in the Central African Republic and Mali, filling the void left by French and international forces to help two countries deal with radical Islamist groups. There are also reports that Wagner has been fighting in Libya and Mozambique, where frequent conflicts required government agencies to be protected by a skilled army. Wagner's growing presence in Africa raises concerns for the United States and its Western allies. According to U.S. intelligence, Wagner not only strengthens autocratic governments, causes instability, violates human rights, they also act as Kremlin special agents to help Russia expand its influence. However, many African governments, such as Mali, argue that the French military and other international forces stationed in their countries are helpless against extremist groups. There are even indications that Western forces are also collaborating with these extremist groups, including the African branch of ISIS, which complicates the security situation, creating insecurity for the people. In this situation, Wagner shows a professional image. Well-planned campaigns help push extremist groups out of the territory. That is why since the war in Ukraine broke out, a wave of boycott of Russia has taken place globally, especially in Western countries. But Africa's views about Russia have not been changed. In the past, in order to repel Wagner's influence, the United States and its allies have had many specific activities, such as preventing governments in Africa from signing contracts with Wagner. The most significant efforts were the U.S.-Africa Summit held in December 2022. There was an opportunity for the White House to commit to more than 40 African countries to increase investment, develop science and technology in order to compete with the influence of China and Russia. Some experts say that, despite the delay, while China is deepening its roots in Africa, there is still time if the U.S. implements what is announced at this summit. Once the African states are no longer in conflict, Wagner's role will automatically disappear. Wagner has enjoyed considerable success in Africa, from deploying mercenaries to Libya and Sudan between 2015 and 2017. Since then, Wagner has established representations in more than a dozen African countries and gradually pushed back the influence of France and the United States, especially in defense. Mali's government announced in 2002 that French and German troops were not welcomed. Most armed forces of these two countries later withdrew. There are some ideas suggesting that if Wagner faces a major defeat in Ukraine, they can return to the powerful and experienced mission of conducting expeditionary operations, providing security services to countries in Africa to access precious natural resources. Nowhere Wagner feels more excited than Africa. This continent is facing a wave of jihadist activity stretching from the Sahel to part of the Horn of Africa in Mozambique. Wagner offers practical services to those in need of security assistance. They protect government buildings and sensitive structures. They also train the host country's armed forces, helping to increase their ability to deal with extremist groups. They approach African countries with a soft and friendly attitude, not the way mother countries talk to colonies, as many African countries accuse the West. Africa is home to many insurgencies and terrorist threats. The most dangerous are the affiliates of Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State (IS). There are also many extremist groups that want to build an independent state or a large autonomous region. For example, the Tuareg organization operates at the junction of the borders of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Being attacked by one side, they will run to the other side and vice versa. The second most notorious extremist organization is Seleka in the Central African Republic. These groups saw chaos and insecurity across a large swath of Central Africa. Many groups were born from ethnic, religious, political, and economic inequality. Where these groups operate, there is often weak government, corruption, and bureaucracy. France's decision to withdraw its forces from the Central African Republic and Mali left a vacuum that Wagner skillfully exploited. Lack of security commitment from the West, as well as the ineffectiveness of Western armed forces, is creating favor for Wagner. Currently, Wagner cooperates to keep security in Burkina Faso, provides equipment and training in Eritrea, as well as provides communication equipment and training to the Zimbabwe army. According to a U.S. intelligence document, Wagner received tasks, so they were invited to protect VIPs in Africa. Russian security services often operate outside through private organizations. Wagner might be an example. In recent years, the West has increased its involvement in Africa in order to compete for influence with China and Russia. However, these efforts encountered many unfavorable conditions. For example, the West frequently criticizes African governments for human rights violations, which has damaged trust on both sides. Recently, the West, although theoretically supporting the fight against extremist groups in Africa, has almost no support for the governments of African countries, except a small number of humanitarian packages. The West does not believe that corrupt governments can effectively fight extremist organizations. There are even concerns that Western weapons may fall into the hands of these jihadist groups. That is why the United States should start making its goals public in Africa, while goals such as preventing African extremist groups from carrying out terrorist attacks on U.S. and European land remain the most important. The rest should not be overlooked. For example, helping to improve the lives of people in Africa, humanitarian aid helping to build the capacity of civil society groups, and training African students can contribute to development in a long time. Most African students speak French fluently. This is a favorable condition compared with students from Asia. America and Europe can help a large number to come to study, then return to serve their countries. Priority occupations are agriculture, green energy, environmental protection, law, engineering, or mining. Africa has natural conditions to develop these fields. What they need now is a high-quality human resource and a stable security environment. Recently, the United States has regularly made a commitment. They will pay more attention to Africa to compete for influence with China and Russia. However, words are not enough. This commitment must be accompanied by practical actions. Many African countries are losing trust in the United States as policy change with each president. For example, many African aid programs were removed after President Donald Trump took office. The United States needs to overcome this obstacle to build a lasting, productive relationship with Africa. Another issue is human rights. Some experts suggest the U.S. needs to be flexible and pragmatic, like it's doing with Saudi Arabia. To help Africa deal with extremist groups effectively, they need a stable government with succession and continuity. If the current government reserves the policy of the previous government, trying to get embezzlement during its time in office before the next election, the fight against extremist organizations will not be effective. Poverty will continue from generation to generation. Therefore, instead of criticizing Africa on human rights issues, the West can help them strengthen their administrations. For example, training human resources through short-term and long-term programs. The long term is to send African students and civil servants to the US or Europe for training. Short-term are locally organized courses, possibly through an association with a local university or educational institution. These programs, which American education system has applied successfully in the Middle East and many Asian countries, greatly enhance the capacity of public servants. Why the United States is paying more attention to Africa, as evidenced in poor countries like Burkina Faso, Libya, Mali, and Mozambique, these efforts may be too little and too late. Russian mercenaries have been present in these countries for a long time. However, Wagner's goal is purely to ensure security and make money. They are different from China, when Beijing wants more, like turning African countries into debtors, leading to dependence and sometimes at the expense of territorial sovereignty. That's why many voices in Africa say that the West should not focus much on Wagner because their role is having positive implications for African security. Western scholars also admit that the partner, opponent, and source of the greatest risk for Africa is the power from Asia. Some hardliners from the West say that the United States must stop Wagner's activity in Africa. Wagner benefits from military and business relationships with many African governments. Wagner is a company with close ties to, or possibly to cover for, the Russian government, so they have a strong logistics network, helping to exploit resources in Africa professionally. Profits may contribute to the Russian war machine in Ukraine. The United States has already sanctioned several Wagner subsidiaries or close ties to Wagner, such as Lobelia Invest or Morel Gold. However, some argue that there should be tougher actions, punishing companies in Africa that help and facilitate Wagner's operations. For example, a forestry corporation in the Republic of Central Africa. It is the only way to weaken Wagner's network in the Black Continent. In addition to naming and sanctioning companies linked to Wagner, the United States and Europe should also work together to identify end users of Wagner exports from Africa. Many export items such as gold, diamond, and timber can penetrate the US and European market. Western government must stop such shipments, punish companies that do business with Wagner, block Wagner's exports and transshipment to third countries. According to some experts, in addition to targeting Wagner's business empire, Washington should increase pressure on some African countries so that they need less mercenaries from Russia. Some scholars argue choosing Wagner because many African governments despair after decades of dealing with violence without the West helping. Even the West complicates the situation. Wagner helps without being attacked to human rights, democracy, and political commitment. This is far from Western and Chinese claims. Everything from the West is quality, such as weapons, education, medical equipment, humanitarian goods, product services. But the problem is that the West approach is unpopular with Africa. Its intentions are often changed and not always with good purposes. China's loans are easy without any political conditions, but the terms of contract are often come with very dangerous conditions, such as capital from China must hire Chinese contractors and hire Chinese workers. This is the reason why many African countries fall into the debt trap. Many experts said that to strengthen cooperation with Africa, to achieve success, the United States and Europe should change their approach. Attitude like a mother country to a colony must be abandoned forever. Africa should not be considered as a third world full of poor countries or low in awareness. The U.S.-Africa Summit in December 2022, there has been some progress on this issue, but still too little. China is successful in Africa because it has a flexible approach. African leaders visiting China are warmly welcomed. They are invited to national dinner, see famous places, and visit majestic landscapes. When they return, they are also given expensive souvenirs with many meanings. This has made African leaders see that, even as a small country, they are treated equally with great power. In addition, the children of African leaders are often given huge scholarships to study in China. Wagner's approach is not like China, but also puts the interests of Africa and itself first, in the spirit of win-win, based on equality and respect. Wagner brings what African countries need, ensures security. In return, Wagner gets what they need is money, possibly through resource extraction. Many experts say that the West now has many strengths such as advanced science and technology, progressive democratic, a law-based model of social governance, and self-balancing three branches of powers, and an always-changing capitalist movement. However, currently competing for influence in Africa, the West is losing to China and may lose to Russia's Wagner in near future. If the West changes, the attraction of them in Africa will likely be much stronger. Much of Africa speaks French. Many countries also speak English. This is a favorable door for the West to bring its liberal education to the Black continent. What remains is just a more humble attitude, not looking at Africa with colonial eyes. Besides, it's necessary to be flexible, putting the interests of Africa first. For example, in issues such as human rights or democracy, imposing the thinking rigidly on Africa is easy to backfire, creating opportunities for China and Russia to increase influence. Our program has come to an end now. Thanks for your attention and see you next time.